class. Today we're going to be learning about Margaret Newman's theory of health as expanding consciousness. My name is Adriana.
My name is Ashley.
And my name is Raquel.
So to begin with, this is Margaret Newman. She was born on October 10th, 1933. She was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. She first got her bachelor's in home economics and English from Baylor University. She has her bachelor's degree in nursing from the University of Tennessee, her master's in medical surgical nursing from University of California, San Francisco, and her PhD in nursing from NYU.
Okay, so influencing factors for Margaret Newman. When she first decided to go into nursing, it was because her mom had gotten sick. So that's when she learned about living in the present by taking care of her mom and not letting the disease define a person. So for her work experience, she was a clinical instructor at a clinical research center in Utah. I meant University of Tennessee. And then she was a professor at NYU and Penn State, and then a nurse theorist at the University of Minnesota, where she retired in 1996.
Okay, so we're going to talk about influencers that influence Newman's. It was Martha Rogers, Isaac Bento, Arthur Young, and David Boham. For Isaac Bento, the concept of evolution of consciousness. For Young, it was a theory of process, and Boham was the theory of implicate. But the main influencer for Newman was Martha Rogers. Her theory was a theory of unitary human being, was her main inspiration, and it inspired Newman in the way that Martha wanted to have mind, body, and spirit must be together in order to make a person whole. So that's where Newman got its inspiration from the most.
Margaret Newman's core concepts, the biggest one with her, core concept with her with health, it leads to conditions of disease and no disease. This was a big thing that inspired her with her mother, was the fact that health can be a state of disease or no disease, and when you are within that state of disease, for example, it could be a chronic disease, and that chronic disease necessarily doesn't define that person's health state at the moment. Just because they are living with a chronic disease, it could be they are technically still healthy at that moment. Another thing that inspired this core concept was disease can be a manifestation of an underlying pattern of a person. Those underlying patterns can be the tendencies of that human and those experiences that pretty much define that person. Disease may exist in the manifestation of pattern that exists prior to the manifestation of physical or structural changes. So the big thing, so again, these manifestations of a pattern can be any physical or influential experience that this person experiences that may influence them to who they are within that moment, or what it influences their mindset of this disease that they might potentially have or do have. Any removal of the disease does not change an individual's pattern. So a person can be their pattern, their experiences as to who they are within that moment. If quote-unquote illness is the only way an individual's pattern can be manifested, then that is a health for that person. And also health is expansion on consciousness. And to expand a little bit on that last point of expanding the consciousness, this is where the person gives an insight of their own life and what they're living for and within that meaning, and expanding their own consciousness based on the disease or no disease that they do have at that moment, and expanding on that thought.
Although the HEC theory does not directly reference religion or God, it does have some aspects of religion in it, kind of similar, that every person, no matter their situation, or as hopeless as it can seem, they're a part of a process of expanding consciousness, that they're finding a greater meaning to life and a greater connection of new heights with those in the world. It also relates to doing with rather than doing for, and it has a very holistic approach with connecting with mind, body, and spirit. The theory also allows for nurses to unveil meanings and open possibilities of new ways of living with those for chronic diseases, like creating better connections with patients as the nurse gets to know herself.
So we didn't find, we found that it's used more in the Eastern globally, as opposed to here locally, because the nurses locally, Western, are more linear. Although her theory is not considered modernized, many nurses practice health as expanded consciousness, but understanding their reasons for practice and creating trusting relationship with their patients in order to best provide for them. Like I explained earlier, it's more of a linear, as opposed to globally, it's more it's Eastern and indigenous cultures. Okay. So globally, like I had explained earlier, is used in the Eastern, and they're more consciousness and using mind, body, and spirit as a whole, as opposed to locally, it's more linear. And so globally, they use it as a brighter perspective, as opposed to locally, it's just basically straightforward.
So the impact on theory of practice and discipline of nursing, again, going back to the whole idea of it not being practiced that much locally, just because locally in the westernized way of thinking, nurses tend to think a lot more linearly as opposed to globally, where Eastern cultures are more broad in the idea of bringing together the mind, body, and spirit aspect of it. So Margaret Newman's theory of health as expanding consciousness was supported by Martha Rogers' science of unitary. That is consistent with the unitary transformative paradigm in nursing, in which changes are seen as predictable, unpredictable, and transformative, as opposed to here in modernized, westernized thinking, we'd like to be as much predictable as we can when it comes to medicine. We want to predict what's coming ahead. So Newman's explained that human beings are seen as unitary and inseparable from a wider unitary field, in which combines person, family, and community all at once. This is a very broad aspect of this idea that we like to combine as much of the community, person, and family all to kind of incorporate the health of this person. Newman's theory has a great impact on nursing practices within the unitary transformative paradigm, as it interconnects and thinks of mind, body, and spirit again, and emotions of the undivided whole that influences this person in their health and their way of thinking in that moment of time.
The HEC has been widely utilized in research by many theorists. It's been used in New Zealand, Japan, Kenya, and many different studies to see how nurse and patient interactions work. The application allows for a partnership between the nurse practitioner, individual, family, and community for a better understanding of pattern of meaning. In education, it is a person-centered approach, which is like a holistic approach where what is meaningful to the student comes back into focus of the educator. And then for teaching, it is important for the nurse to fully understand who they are so that they can, and teaching is important for the nurse to fully understand who they are so that they can in their entirety be with the patient, so that the nurse can be authentic as possible with the patient.
So the use of theory to improve patient outcomes, again, just because it's not widely used in westernized cultures, this theory specifically, it can definitely be applied to our modern way of thinking within this westernized view of practice as opposed to Eastern, where it's mostly been used in practice and researched in. So Newman's paradigms views a patient as whole and finds meaning in their experiences. These experiences are what creates this person and allows them to live within their now, especially while living with a chronic disease. Nurses practice the HEC perspective are fully present without judgment, goals, or intervention strategies. It allows nurses and patients to work together in developing awareness in self and the environment. So this is where nurses and patients can come together, create a greater bond, create a trusting relationship in which they both view their ideas as higher expanding consciousness, where the nurses can be able to go out and experience what they are really practicing for, and patients can go ahead and realize what they are living for at that moment of this chronic disease that they're living through, and they can combine those two views together and create a very strong relationship that allows both the nurse and patient to bounce back off each other. This also provides the basis of nursing and patient interaction again. It allows patients and nurses to open up and form a trusting bond. It allows nurses to become more fulfilled with their work and improving patient interactions, again, with nurses going back and realizing through their consciousness of why they're in practice to begin with. Nurses seek more information about their patients to understand their patterns so they can understand those underlying patterns that created this person to be who they are at that moment. It also helps nurses identify with chronic patients by promoting healthy interactions and allowing them to find meaning in the situations and lives at that moment of their chronic disease.
Okay, so contribution of theory to the MSN prepared nurse role. So first, it will improve research in the unitary transformation paradigm, which is was founded by Newman, as explained earlier, for the nurses and the client relationship, as it is essential to involve authentic presence as the nurse interacts with their patients in a caring perspective way. And also too, it will expanding consciousness in a patient and nurse relationship by reflecting in patterns of enhancing the relationship, creating meaning, and changing patterns as the nurse interacts with each patient. And also with Newman's theory of health, as expanding consciousness, nurses' practice will improve and possess a complex level of awareness, while caring for each patient in a physical, once again, emotional, spiritual, and mental, as they interconnect together and make patient whole.
This is a list of our references, and we want to thank you again with our audience that we had in the background, but thanks for watching, guys.